Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack the incredible, chaotic, and honestly pretty fascinating story of England. Think about this for a second. England grew into a nation with massive global influence, shaping the modern world in ways we still see every single day. But here's the ultimate paradox. That monumental influence, it was fundamentally built by continuous waves of foreign invasion and cultural integration. It wasn't built in some isolated bubble. It is literally the ultimate melting pot. For 2,000 years, the borders were porous, the rulers kept changing, and the culture just kept adapting.
Okay, let's dive into this. On our agenda today, we have the early invasions, Vikings and the Norman Conquest, plagues, revolts and roses, the Tudor Golden Age, Civil War and Revolution, and finally, the birth of modern Britain. Through these 6 eras, we'll see exactly how England and its language evolved.
Starting with Section 1. The early invasions, how the Romans and Anglo-Saxons laid the foundation.
We are starting way back. We're talking about the transition from a prehistoric landmass completely connected to Europe into an isolated island that became a highly prized target for ambitious conquerors. It's wild to think about how vulnerable early Britain was, geographically and politically. So, 11,000 years ago, the melting ice sheets completely flooded Doggerland. That was the land bridge connecting Britain to Europe. Suddenly, it's an island. Fast forward to 43 AD, and the uncontested superpower of the ancient world, the Roman Empire, decides they want it. Emperor Claudius orders an invasion, and just like that, for centuries, England is Roman. But, empires fall. By 407 AD, Rome recalls its legions to defend the continent. This leaves a massive power vacuum. And who fills it? Germanic tribes, known to us as the Anglo-Saxons. They crossed the sea in the 5th century, settled the eastern lands, and pushed the native Celtic populations far to the west, into places like modern-day Wales. These Anglo-Saxons essentially replaced the Romano-British culture with their own, planting the very earliest linguistic roots of what we now call English.
But here's the catch. The Anglo-Saxons didn't just form one big, happy, unified country. Nope, they formed independent, rival kingdoms. So what happens when an emerging, totally disunited nation becomes the target of a new, fearsome enemy? How do these fragile, feuding kingdoms survive when fleets of terrifying longboats start appearing on the horizon?
That brings us to Section 2, Vikings and the Norman Conquest, from the great heathen army to the pivotal year of 1066.
This was a period of intense, brutal northern invasions that absolutely tested whether an Anglo-Saxon identity could even survive. It starts off as a localized nightmare in 793 AD when Vikings conduct a devastating hit-and-run raid on the Lindisfarne monastery. But their strategy drastically shifts in 865 AD. The Vikings aren't just looking for treasure anymore, they want the land. The great heathen army lands, and systematically wipes out almost all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Literally only one survives, Wessex. And in 878 AD, with the very existence of England hanging by a thread, King Alfred the Great makes a desperate final stand at Edington, driving the Vikings back. His grandson Athelstan actually finishes the job in 927 AD. He conquers Viking-held York and finally becomes the first true king of the English. They fought back and managed to forge a unified nation.
But, as you can probably guess, that unity was super fragile. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing the sheer chaos that unfolds in just a single year, 1066. Look at how incredibly fast history can pivot. In January, the king dies without an heir. Bad start. By September, the new king, Harold, is fighting off a massive Norwegian invasion up in the north. He wins, but just weeks later, in October, he has to march his exhausted army all the way south to fight Duke William of Normandy at the Battle of Hastings. Harold is killed, supposedly taking an arrow straight to the eye, and by Christmas Day, William the Conqueror is crowned king. In a matter of just a few months, the entire Anglo-Saxon elite is completely wiped out, totally replaced by French-speaking Normans.
Moving right into Section 3, Plagues, Revolts, and Roses, a time of severe medieval turmoil and civil war.
This aggressive Norman takeover brings us directly into the medieval Plantagenet era, setting the stage for a period marked by absolutely catastrophic crises, both from Mother Nature and from within. I want you to take a second to let that number sink in, 50%. When the Black Death arrived on English shores in 1348 via a ship from France, it didn't just cause widespread panic. It fundamentally altered the entire nation's demographics and economy almost overnight. Half the population was simply gone.
The socioeconomic fallout of that plague was immense. First, you get a sudden, dramatic reduction in military manpower. And because labor was incredibly scarce, the surviving peasantry basically realized their worth. They rightly demanded higher wages. But the government, who was desperately needing cash to fight the 100 Years' War with France, responded by enforcing ever-increasing taxes. Well, you can't squeeze a devastated population forever. The pressure cooker finally exploded into the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, where totally frustrated workers marched right on London and executed the government officials they blamed for their misery.
And as if plagues and peasant uprisings weren't enough, the ruling nobility turned on each other. This is the infamous Wars of the Roses. On one side, you have the House of Lancaster, represented by the Red Rose, desperately trying to hold on to power after some disastrous military losses in France. On the other side, the House of York, the White Rose, challenging them for the throne. It was a vicious 30-year civil war that totally tore the country apart. It only ended in 1485 when Henry Tudor, the last male of the Lancastrian line, defeated the Yorkist King Richard III at Bosworth Field.
Which leads us to Section 4, the Tudor Golden Age, religious upheaval and maritime dominance.
That decisive victory at Bosworth brought some much-needed relative peace. But don't get too comfortable, because it unleashed entirely new domestic and religious conflicts that changed England forever. The primary catalyst for this was Henry VIII. Now, we all know about his 6 wives, but we're going to bypass that drama today to focus on the institutional impact. So the crucial point is that a king's personal, desperate desire for a male heir literally rewrote the nation's religion. When the Pope rejects his divorce request, Henry doesn't just pout. He radically splits the entire nation away from the Catholic Church. He essentially establishes himself as the supreme head of the brand new Protestant Church of England. This one single, very personal decision sparked a century of violent religious sectarianism.
The whiplash that followed was intense, to put it mildly. First, his daughter Mary takes the throne. She's a devout Catholic and violently tries to reverse the Reformation, earning the charming nickname Bloody Mary by burning around 280 Protestants at the stake. But her reign is short. Her half-sister, Queen Elizabeth I, steps in, restores Protestantism, and brings a really crucial degree of religious tolerance back. This stability allowed England to absolutely flourish. Under Elizabeth, we see a true golden age. The population booms to 5 million, the arts explode with legends like William Shakespeare, and England steps onto the world stage as a fearsome maritime power, famously defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588.
But as the Tudor era eventually ends, a massive political crisis is brewing in the background. What happens when the absolute, unchecked power of a monarch collides head-on with the growing confident authority of Parliament?
Enter Section 5, Civil War and Revolution, the battle for the soul of the government. Under the new Stuart dynasty, we see the ultimate showdown over who truly rules England. Is it the king or the people's representatives? The tension finally snaps in 1642 with the English Civil War. You have 2 highly polarized factions, the Royalists, who are completely loyal to King Charles I and his belief in absolute, divine authority. Standing against them are the Roundheads, the parliamentarian forces led by Oliver Cromwell and his highly effective new model army. This was a brutal fight for the soul of the government, and the Roundheads' ultimate victory shattered the ancient illusion that royal power was somehow untouchable. Let's move to and see how this builds this rapid evolution of governance, because the speed here is staggering. In 1649, the unthinkable happens. King Charles I is literally executed, and England briefly becomes a republic. By 1660, the country is exhausted, so they restore the monarchy with Charles II. But crucially, his powers are significantly reduced. Then, in 1688, when his Catholic brother James II threatens to upset the balance again, Parliament orchestrates the Glorious Revolution. They effectively fire the king and bring in Protestant William and Mary. By 1689, the new monarchs are forced to accept the Bill of Rights. This right here is the irreversible turning point, where Parliament's sovereignty is cemented above the crown.
Section 6, Birth of Modern Britain, the shift from a sovereign nation to a global empire.
This is the point where England stops being a standalone story and morphs into a global superpower. You see, in 1707, with the Acts of Union, the English and Scottish parliaments were formally merged. The distinct, sovereign borders of England kind of blurred as it united with its northern neighbor to create the Kingdom of Great Britain. From this point onwards, the history of England becomes inextricably intertwined as the foundational engine of the wider United Kingdom.
As part of Great Britain, the nation's trajectory just skyrockets. Under the Hanoverian kings, we see a massive growth in global commerce and a seriously powerful royal navy. Then, the Industrial Revolution hits, completely supercharging the nation's economic output and funding its rapid expansion into the largest global empire in human history. Yeah, sure, the loss of America during the War of Independence was a significant blow to their prestige, but the empire kept growing anyway. It actually wasn't until the unimaginable financial and human toll of the 20th century's two world wars that this globe-spanning imperial dominance finally began to decline.
So, we've traveled all the way from flooded land bridges to a global empire. And this brilliantly illustrates what I meant at the very beginning when I called England a melting pot. The physical legacies of all those wars and invasions? Sure, they might be hidden in ruins or behind glass in museums, but the cultural legacy is literally alive in our mouths right now. The Romans left us Latin. The Anglo-Saxons gave us our Germanic base. The Vikings sprinkled in Old Norse. The Normans completely overhauled our vocabulary with French. The constant evolution and adaptability of its people are perfectly mapped right there in the language.
Every single time you speak, you aren't just communicating a thought. You are echoing the voices of Roman legionaries, Viking raiders, and Norman conquerors. So the next time you open your mouth, I want you to ask yourself, just how much history are you speaking right now? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible stories that are hiding in plain sight.